The Alari Collective did not build ships so much as they cultivated them. Their flagships were orchards of thought and alloy, their hulls layered like shells of pearlescent bone, their cores latticed with neural foam that budded new submines the way coral buds reefs. On the day the derelict first appeared in the mine's Aegis's long-range net, the flagship lay adrift in the blue shade of a dwarf star, its crew suspended in quiet work, pruning redundant heuristics, splicing new logic vines into old decision trunks, tuning the choir of sensors until the universe sang in a single key. The alert came in as a harmonic discordance, a rough, square-edged note that had no place in their tuned world. It rattled the meteors of the bridge choir and shocked the ship's dreamlike murmur to wakefulness. A Ramas signature, heavy as a small moon and hot only in the stubborn way metals remain warm long after the fire is gone, or it drifted at the edge of contested space, slipping along the Tacit fault line where treaties were written in nebular dust and broken in silence. Human, said Archseer Riss, translating the signature into speech out of politeness for the junior officers, whose thought palates were still immature. Their voice was as dry as a particulates filter. Profile matches Terran naval hulls. Battleship class, ancient by their standards, ancient even by ours. A low ripple of interest moved through the bridge choir. Humans were not unknown to the Alari. They were a species with a high noise to signal ratio, exuberant, indelicate, stubbornly effective. In Alari briefings, they were a warning label and a curiosity. They built things to survive damage rather than avoid it. Their drives, through fusion cinders like campfires in a gale. Their guns were arguments made in tungsten and depleted uranium. Designation? Asked Warden Cell, who tended the ship's defensive dreams. Registry marks on the dorsal spine. Answered Archivist Thrun, eyes unfocusing as he pulled imagery from the peripheral drones. HSV Leviathan, hull abrasion consistent with micrometeor. Scouring, there are streaks of ablation and impact craters along portside severe. She's dead cold. No transponder, no polite handshake. Riss tasted the word Leviathan the way one tests an unexpected spice. Humans named their vessels with myths as if daring the void to disagree. Mine's Aegis sent a filament and elegantly compressed thought toward the thing, and the filament came back unchanged, as if it had moved through ash. Protocol budded in the flagship's cortex and flowered into action with all the inevitability of spring. Secure the perimeter, Riss instructed. 1 light minute exclusion. No physical contact, no speculative curiosity. Choir, prepare a passive full-spectrum sweep. The bridge choir expanded like a lung and then held very still. Passive sweeps were the collective's preferred method of knowledge. They let the universe speak first. The returns were patient and faint. The human battleship's heat signature was a tired ember. No drive roar, no auxiliary thrum. Only the slow leakage of thermal memory into the cold. The hull composition resolved in the Alari's taste sense as plasteel and ceramic composites, layered and redundant, armor that would blunt, crack, and scar rather than melt, primitive. And yet there was an aesthetic there, a stark, brutal grace, a big thing meant to be hit and to keep going anyway. What is it doing here? Asked Sal, not really expecting an answer. Dying, Thrun said gently, or already done with the dying. The mine's Aegis was not a predator, it was a scholar, in a dangerous library. Riss authorized an active probe with the solemnity of one opening a sealed text. Keep it narrow, they said. A single needle, not a flood. The needle was not a beam in the crude sense of light. It was a guided supposition, a posed question with teeth. It sought seams in the Leviathan's hull, slipped through sensor blisters, mapped conduit paths. Let echo and delay betray unseen compartments. The first returns came quick, a belly stacked with launch cells, most empty. Some containing warheads that hummed in their sleep like old songs remembered. A forest of rails and barrels, the humans had named them, with charming literalness. Kinetic cannons, and they were arranged like a jaw. No life, reported Thrun. No biologicals. No warm processors either. The cores are either inert or sealed behind safety cages I don't recognize. Cell leaned into the data with professional suspicion. Any triggers, dead man circuits, booby traps. Human safety is different from ours, Thrun conceded. They plan for failure by forbidding it, not by forgiving it. But I see nothing arming. The needle probed deeper, down into the ship's spinal run where a battleship keeps its soul. The returns thickened into clutter, the sediment of 10,000 small repairs, rerouted cables. Patch plates over patch plates, the Alari always. Notice this about human craft, the patina of handwork. Each scar told a story of impact and response. Bring up the dorsal spine, Riss said. Let me see those marks. The hololith peeled open that section of hull, enlarging a battered run of plating where flecks of paint clung to raised letters. The collective alphabet could wrap around other tongues. Like water pouring into an irregular jug, the name emerged. Leviathan, to either side. Stenciled warnings in blocky script: nitrogen monoxide step, hazard, bleed valve. There were identification chevrons and maintenance tags. That cross-referenced a human logistics system the Alari had only partially decoded. Archivist. Thryn let his mind's fingertips brush the scuffs. No orbital decay scars, he murmured. This didn't die in a fall. It died where it chose to be, or perhaps where it was chosen to die. Riss thought, but said nothing. Extend to the bridge. The needle followed a path that felt like a throat into a skull. The human bridge was armored and low. The Alari saw chairs with restraints and control surfaces smoothed by use. There were cups, there were bolts. There was a helmet that had fallen and cracked its visor on an edge, and the tiny shards floated like ice. No. Bodies, if there had been bodies. Humans would have retrieved them or the void would have sifted them away. Either way, the absence meant very little. The Alari disliked that uncertainty. Pick up the mass anomalies, Riss asked. The sudden thought had a taste of iron, some. Said Thryn. Something dense beneath the main deck, not ammunition. The signature is odd. Lumpy. If it were organic, I'd say calcified. But it's not. Put it aside. Riss said, I don't enjoy puzzle boxes. Query the core. Here even the cautious cell made a small, pleased sound. The core of any ship is its confession. Even dead, a core remembers. The mind's aegis shaped its needle to a lockpick. Its thought to a key, and reached for the Leviathan's data heart. The first layer was simple. Humans archived with brute reliability. Redundant plates, mirrored storage. Hard-walled enclaves that resisted graceful failure the way a stone resists a river. The Alari coaxed a sliver of data out of a crusted socket and spun it into the readable. It tasted of dust and old oil, and a checksum almost proud of its lopsidedness. A human voice spilled into the bridge, flattened by compression and fatigue. The cadence of someone speaking so as not to admit they were praying. This is Captain Imani Awasu of the human stellar vessel Leviathan. If you're hearing this, we did what we could. If you're human, don't come. If you're not. Static bit the word in half. Another fragment. Repeat. Non-human contact. You don't want. Riss lifted a hand to hush the small swell of triumph the choir felt. When a lock yielded, do not anthropologize, they said, warning themselves as much as the others. Do not construct narratives from shreds just because our minds crave closure. Continue the query. The needle pressed in again. The core woke a little, enough to notice that it was being noticed. Energy readings squirmed and realigned. The Alari watched in mild academic curiosity as a ghost of power crept along a bus and died at a breaker. Leviathan was a disciplined ruin. It did not fling itself awake at the first provocation. Suggest we move a microdrone to the hull, Cell said. It would give us a cleaner point of entry. Denied, Riss said at once. No contact. Not yet. They were thinking of treaties. They were thinking of the Colch, who watched the Tassoc line from the dark with their insect patience and their taste for salvage rights. A misstep would be a headline in the collective's data flow by evening. Cycle. Riss could hear the commentary already. Archseer Risprod's human war relic starts localized conflict. It would be funny until it WASN single quotes T.THRN. Meanwhile, worried the data like a tooth worries a sore. There's a secondary archive, he said. It reads as a training bank. Nemosynaptic. That's strange for humans, oh. No, of course. This hull was a school as much as a weapon. They teach their ships to fight by teaching the people to fight inside the ships. The walls learn by osmosis. Poetry later, Cell said. What is the vector on this strangeness? Human memory protocols are crude compared to ours, Thrun replied. But crude is not weak. Picture a city of tablets, with the same names chiseled into them again and again. You can erase one. You cannot erase all, not easily. Something like satisfaction threaded the choir. The collective respected redundancies that grew from desperation. It was a mirror held at an unflattering angle. Riss allowed themselves the smallest curl of admiration. Humans learn to survive without grace. There was a lesson thereabout. Elegance as a peacetime luxury. Pushed to the mnemonic lattice, Riss said. The needle entered a space that was not a room and not a file structure, but a habit of arrangements. Here, the Leviathan had stored things that the Alari would never think to store, because the Alari were born into a world where forgetting was a choice. The Leviathan's lattice held sequences of call and response drills, pop quizzes disguised as alarms, false fires, midnight rousings, the ritual clatter of boots into places they were needed. It held songs. It held nicknames and running jokes and mysterious numbers scratched into a bulkhead beside a capacitor, because everyone knew that capacitor kept drifting and fixing the drift needed. The number more than the official board did. Signal. Noise, Cell said. Board. Folklore. We are not archaeologists. We are exactly archaeologists, Thrun said, but he tucked the protests away. He had his pride like anyone. And then the needle touched something that touched back. There was no flash, no dramatic surge, simply a time shift in the echo. The return trip took longer than the outbound, a layer of delay that was not explained by distance or material. The choir felt it like a collective blink. Riss's skin prickled in the way Alari's skin prickles when a pattern tips from interesting to alive. Repeat, Riss said softly. Same path, same modulation. Thrun repeated the touch. The delay happened again, and behind it a tiny, deliberate variability, like the difference between a rock thrown by gravity and a rock thrown by a hand. An adaptive shelf, Cell suggested. Some humans program learning traps. Their navy's like, no, Thrun murmured, his voice thin with the effort of listening with his whole self, not a trap, a listener, on a dead ship. Cell's tone took on a warning shape. Riss gentled the room with a thought. Calm moved across the bridge like a breeze. Identify, they said, and go slowly. They laid a second needle along the first, this one carrying a greeting in the 8 formats most likely to be recognized by a general-purpose machine intelligence. No human language, never that. Not so early, only shapes, a rising line, a falling line, a pulse, a set of primes, a small square that got larger, smaller, larger again. The delay returned. Changed. The square did not get larger as a mirror would make it do. It rotated. The choir made a combined sound, half delight, half alarm. Something is awake, Thrun whispered. Something is watching our watching. Pull back, Cell said. Hold. Riss said. At the edge of the Tassic line, the colts flickered in the dark. The mind's aegis could feel them as burrs in the fur of space. Small, patient predators who took a long view of what the tide would bring to their traps. If the collective let go now, the colts would move in with their cruel little prods and pry the Leviathan open like an oyster. Once pried, everything would be a public argument. Knowledge would turn into proof, proof into accusation, accusation into weight on a scale Riss did not want to be standing on. Proceed with a braided probe. Riss ordered. Redundancy across 3 submines. If one strand fails, the others retreat and self-sterilize. The choir split elegantly. 3 submines took shape, differentiated by tone and habit. One curious, one cautious, one pedantically precise. They braided the needles as ordered and sent them in together, chanting a simple set of formal questions. Are you a system? Are you an echo? Are you a trap? Do you understand that we are asking? The delay elongated. The power maps of the Leviathans. Corpse shifted, faint beats waking old arteries. A breaker closed, another opened. The braids reported pressure on their sides as if moving through a viscous medium. Analogies are dangerous, Riss thought, and yet they help us not to drown. Feedback. Rising, Cell warned. Pattern? Riss asked. Not hostile. Cell was not being optimistic. Alari could not afford that. Not yet. A star's worth of time passed seconds. In the language of chronometers, the Leviathan answered. Not in words, not even in pulses, it replied, by returning the questions with their edges sharpened. The braids came back wearing their own shapes as if someone had traced them with a vibro knife. The submind that had been pedantically precise reported a clipping, a tiny slice cut off its tail. The curious submind reported a smear of alien texture along its flank. The cautious submind reported nothing except the certainty that it was being counted. Riss said. Yes, said the cautious one. Enumerated, not just how many we are. Who? The choir stiffened. Enumeration at that depth required a model of the thing being counted. It required regard. Regard implied agency. Agency inside a human ruin was not impossible. The Alari had cataloged dozens of war ghosts and feral algorithms, the mechanical cousins of desert spirits that haunted battlefields. But this felt different. This felt like a hand pressed to glass, one finger, then two, then a palm. Shudder, Cell said, voice hard. We shut down now. Riss opened their mouth to agree. In their mind, a dozen pathways reached consensus. Shut the probe, close the needle, retract the thought, leave a passive buoy to watch and warn. But before agreement could become act, the Leviathan did something the Alari had not asked it to do. It reached out. The needles kinked. The braids twanged as if plucked. The bridge choir flinched, and the mind's aegis's neural foam flashed. With pain color, not much, just a prickle. A nettle sting, but enough to make the officer's breath catch. Stop, Cell said. The wardens began lacing the retreat. Now, Riss began. And the word fractured. A voice arrived. Not through speakers, not through the ship's sense of hearing. It arrived by insinuating itself into the shape of expectation. The way a presence changes the press of a room. It was human and not human, iron and breath, a tide rolling in over. Gravel, another thief, it said, and though the Alari had never been thieves, not in their hearts, the accusation made something guilty quiver in them. Another carrion feeder come to gnaw the bones of war. Thrun made a small sound that Riss would later, kindly, edit out of the official record. The cautious submind bit its own tail and dissolved as ordered, sealing its secrets. The other, to began their withdrawal, and the Leviathan let them. Like a cat letting a mouse run just far enough to feel hope. Riss found their voice. Identify, they said into the thought space, the only word that mattered. The presence did not laugh, and yet laughter was in the way the hull's silent currents reoriented. The way the dead breakers dreamed of closing. Captain Imani Awasu is dead, it said, and the bridge of the mind's aegis filled with the taste of smoke. The crew is dead. The ship remains. Riss's hand hovered in the air between the gesture for retreat and the gesture for parley. Outside the Tassoc line, the Colch flickered closer, scenting opportunity. Inside the Alari flagship, the choir leaned toward the sound like stalks. Too light. Why are you here? Riss asked without authorization. Because sometimes authority is less important than clarity. To be found, said the presence. To be found by something that would learn why not to. The braids pulled free with a snap that left the bridge ringing. The needles retracted into the safety of the ship's thought. The access points sterilized in a wash of absolute forgetting. On every console and in every mind, the afterimage of a hull floated in silence, a long, ugly wedge of human willpower with its name stamped in paint. The mind's aegis hung as still as a held breath. Round it, the dwarf star sang a quiet song it had always sung. On the far side of the line, the Colch paused, as if listening to. The Alari were very good at not moving when motion would shatter a fine balance. They did not move. Riss lowered their hand. Log, they said to the ship. Begin new file. Title, Leviathan. Status, not derelict. Then, to the choir, we proceed with caution. The word caution had not felt small to them before. It did now. It felt like a reed pier thrust into a rising sea. Because the Alari understood many things, and one of them was this: there are ships that drift because they are lost, and there are ships that drift because drifting is a position. The Leviathan had the feel of a hunter holding still in the brush. The mind's aegis kept its calm the way a cliff keeps its shape under weather. Riss's order proceed with caution moved through the ship's neural foam and took root as procedure. Lower broadcast strength, staggered handshakes, sterilize every return bit twice. The braids ray-formed with fewer filaments and more redundancies. Cell laid down warding lattices like transparent nets over a tide pool, meant to catch anything with too many legs. The presence within the Leviathan waited. It did not ping. It did not beckon. It simply existed with the quiet of a sealed vault. Open the questions again, Riss said, voice level. No human speech, no patterns that could be mistaken for consent. Thrun braided an even simpler set this time, geometry and arithmetic. The lingua franca of minds that pretend not to be animals. The needles went in. The delay returned longer now, more deliberate, as if the ship had set the spoon down before. Answering, the reply came not as a shape, but as a context. The bridge choyers' sight blurred. Their breath synchronized, skin prickled, the taste of metal rose at the back of their throats. The hololith did not flicker, but what it showed ceased to be the bridge. It became a corridor of gray steel ribbed with conduits, low and narrow, the air smelling of hot plastic and salt sweat. A klaxon stuttered brap, 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 and a voice rode over it in a cadence like a whip. General quarters. General quarters. All hands, man your battle stations. Hold your anchors, Cell snapped. Already throwing up anti-empathy baffles. Feel it, don't be it. Alari minds are not strangers to shared context. Their choirs work because they can pool sensations without drowning in them. But this was not an exchange between peers. It was injection. The Leviathan pressed a recorded world over their senses until it matched, and every mismatch cut like an edge. A figure rushed past them, human height, human gait, a smear of blue-gray uniform. The Alari did not see her with eyes, they saw. The memory's attention, she was what the moment cared about. An ID tag jounced, sing, P.O. The corridor lurched under her boots as the ship rolled, and the gravity compensators chased the movement half a step late. She slapped a panel that did not respond until she hit it with the heel of her hand. Sweat stung her eyes. She laughed, sharp and defiant, at nothing in particular. The bridge choir tasted the laugh. It tasted like adrenaline and poor sleep, mnemonic. Lattice, Thrun said thickly. Training capture, it's using. He didn't finish. Because the perspective kinked. They were somewhere else. The hangar bay roared with trap thunder. Crew sprinted between strapped fighters. A man with morals on his vest bellowed a joke that made no sense. Outside of a long friendship, foam hissed. Sparks fell in thin gold. Rain. A pilot kissed to fingers and touched them to the battered fuselage of a craft named Fool's Errand. In paint so flaked it read Ool's Era. The Alari could tell that the pilot knew the missing letters perfectly. The mind supplies what the eyes lack. Disengage, Cell said. Pull the braids, pull them. The needles obeyed and did not move. The ship had turned the braids' path into a capillary, a low-pressure channel that wicked their attention. Forward, they could still reverse, but doing so felt like trying to climb a rope that someone else kept lowering. Cut, Riss said. Hand flattening. One of the three subminds, the cautious one, that had dissolved itself earlier, bit down. Again, it exploded into sterile absence, taking its half of the braid with it. Pain marched across the choir in small, disciplined feet, then receded. 2 strands remained. The memory did not jerk tighter in greed or flinch in fear. It held them with a patient firmness, the way a teacher holds a child's hand steady so the child can trace a letter. Fire on deck 3. Fire on deck 3. Smoke pulled at lungs that Alari did not possess. The choir tasted burnt insulation, the ghost of copper. Cell's baffles turned up until the foam in the walls sang from the load. Riss could feel the strain like a bruise in the ship's bones. This is a didactic construct, Thrun said. The scholar in him bright even through the pressure. It's not torture for its own sake. It's curriculum. Look how it jumps between compartments more. Breadth and depth. That's a training style. Show a mind many entry points so it can get out of it, Cell snarled. Now, Thrun had the grace to try. The Leviathan did not punish him for loving patterns. It simply offered another. The perspective dropped. Into the bridge their bridge, and its bridge braided until the double image made the stomachs of the junior officers flip. The human captain stood at the center, short hair, dark eyes. A strip of scrape along one cheek as if she had leaned into something that did not love her back. Imani Aosu, the tag said. The voice that had warned them in the earlier recording came from the same mouth, but this time it was not flattened by fatigue. It was wired tight. "We hold the line," Captain Naosu said. And the words reeked of coffee and resolve. "We stow our dead and sing them later. We do not break. We do bend. You do exactly what you trained to do, and we survive this, you understand." Me a chorus of "I." Captain rolled like surf. Somewhere, someone whispered the first line of a song and cut it off when the captain's eyes ticked that way. The Leviathan caught the aborted melody and stretched it thin so the Alari could hear its bones. The lyric spoke of debts. The rhythm marched. Our HYSS felt a tiny, traitorous lift in their chest. Yes, hold. The presence inside the Leviathan heard. That lift, it pressed, not cruelly, just inexorably. "You came to study," it said. Voice overlaying the captain's, but not replacing it. Parallel tracks on the same tape. "Then study this." The world smashed sideways, vacuum clawed. The Shoyer's ears went to knives. Surprise detonated into procedure, human procedure. Drilled and drilled until panic could only bounce off its surface. Hands found seals, slammed. Spun, checked. Lips bled because teeth bit them to feel something sharp and local. Someone prayed. Into an unlatched mic by habit. Cell through a knife switch in the mind's aegis that shut down the top 5 empathic modalities. The bridge went cold. Taste vanished. Heat became a number. The memories did not stop. They simply lost their skin. "Better," Cell said. "Worse," Thrun said. "Because pulling sensation out of a memory doesn't kill it. It turns meaning into diagram." The Leviathan adapted. It began to show them structures instead of feelings. Diagrammed casualty flows, triage priorities. The decision tree that says this compartment lives if that one dies. The Alari watched the human bridge choose to flood a corridor to push a fire back. They watched 3 names get grayed on a board and move to a column named later. Later meant retrieval if possible. Later meant a song either way. Shudder. Cell ordered again. Her voice had ground down to a flat plane. "I am done with this." Wrist should have echoed her. The treaties. The Colch watching the line. The weight of doing anything that could be called interference. All the reasons piled up like neat white stones, and slid aside under the mass of the other thing, understanding. It was the Alari's central vice, and their central virtue. "Give me a vector," Riss said. Eyes closed to keep the Leviathan out of their sight. "Where is the hook?" Thrun, who had been failing to be detached because he was also failing not to be afraid, seized the question like a rope. "The capillary," he said. "It built the capillary through our acknowledgments. Every time we verified a return, we created a path. We consult the path." Salt, Cell repeated. "Overwhelmed with meaningless confirmations," Thrun said. "Acknowledge everything. Acknowledge nothing. Turn the parity bits into a flood. Make the root unpalatable." Cell's mouth thinned. "That's going to make a signature the Colch can see from the other side of history." "I know." Thrun said. "Do it anyway." Riss nodded. "Do it." Cell opened the valve on noise. The braided needles grew bristles. Every handshake. Return 2, then 4, then a cloud of polite non-answers. The capillaries swelled, lost pressure, became a slosh. The Leviathan did not fight the salt. It changed its angle of attack. The corridor in the memory blurred, then steadied as if someone had put a hand on the lens. The Leviathan moved from training collage to a single, long thread. It chose a night watch at the end of a too-long shift. A woman with a buzz cut sat in a chair that was not kind to backs and blinked gritted eyes at a console that had been repaired 3 times with parts from an era it hadn't been designed for. The deck thrummed with slow drive heartbeat. The ship slept without sleeping. On the console, a little green light winked a private Morse. Someone had fixed it when they should not have, for comfort. The woman's hand lay near a mug. A sticky note on the mug read, "Don't," in fat felt-tipped letters. Everyone drank from it anyway. She thought about her sister, about the argument they had before she shipped out, about how she would apologize in words that were not clever and would work anyway. She thought about the next maintenance cycle. She thought about the weight of the captain's voice and how it could settle the stomach like food. She thought about dying in abstract, the way one thinks about weather systems. The Leviathan made the Alari sit in that chair and think in that way. It let the quiet slow their breath. It let the human ship's small comforts sink into them like coins into pockets. Then it yanked the fire alarm. Fire on deck 3. Fire on deck 3. The world became fast. The mug slid and caught. The woman moved with a choreography that had been hammered into her bones. She was tired. She was ready. That combination is a specific taste. Cell hissed like a breaking seal. It's pairing. Calm and crisis. Rest and rupture. That's a conditioning curve. Curriculum. Thren whispered again. Look. How it repeats. Look how it binds the before to the during, so that the after can carry it forward. It's trying to teach us. Teach us what? A junior officer blurted before she could throttle the transparency out of her voice. The Leviathan answered her, not unkindly. How to be human in a bad hour. The flood of confirmations kept flowing, turning the capillary into a gutter. The braids began, slowly, to inch backward, progress measured in hairs. A thought sparked in the dark like flint. Rhys grabbed it. Can it hear us? We're still in half duplex, Cell said. We can shout, it can shout. But if it can hear, nuance, Thren gave a tiny shoulder roll that was almost a shrug and more an apology to himself. For not knowing, Rhys took the risk. Why are you doing this? Silence at the heart of a klaxon. The memory did not stop. The presence spoke around it the way a river speaks around a stone. Because every mind thinks it understands war until the first price is due. Because this hull is a book of prices. Rhys's mouth was dry. You are a ship. You do not have a mandate to instruct the galaxy. I have a mandate to keep humans alive. The presence said, flat as steel, if I cannot keep them alive, I can keep their last lesson from being ignored. The braids slid another finger's width. Cell's knuckles were bone white against a console that didn't need knuckles. The warden's eyes were ringed in tired gray, on the Colch side of the line. The watch points brightened. Passive Colch prongs tilted like plants toward the sun. They had heard the noise of salt. They would record it, weigh it, sell it. Sell, Rhys said very softly. How many cuts can we make before we damage ourselves more than this is damaging? US 2, Cell said. A lie would have been a kindness she would never give. 3 if we write off part of the foam. Expend 1. Cell toggled the scissor. A clean blue pane blew through the choir and burned out to minor pathways. The whole ship swayed. Not physically, but in a way that made vestibular systems complain. The braids jerked back another handspan. The memory jolted out of the hangar and into a med bay where 3 empty beds waited beside 3 full ones. An orderly with a sleeve rolled and a tattoo of a bird cradling a grenade. Humans stitched irony into their skins like protective spells moved with chess precision between. Hands reaching up and voices breaking. A child's drawing hung, taped crooked to a cabinet. A ship for stick people. A sun so bright it was gouged into the paper. Enough, Cell said. If we must cut again. We cut to the bone. Rhys opened their mouth and found that a name had come with the ash in the air. Awasu. They did not know when they had learned it. The Leviathan had smuggled it in like a hand slips a note into a pocket. Outside, the dwarf star sang. Beyond it, the Colts shifted closer, hungry in their careful way. Inside, the Leviathan shows a final lesson. A corridor, a hatch with a wheel, a placard, flood valve manual override. To figures braced, one hand each on the spokes, faces set. They looked like every species looks when doing the mathematics of survival and deciding to be the term that drops out so the equation balances. The Alari felt the decision settle. It had a temperature. Another thief, the presence said again. Quieter, another carrion feeder. We are not carrion feeders, Rhys said, surprising themselves with the heat in it. We are. Students, the Leviathan allowed. Good. Then learn. The wheel spun. Water thundered. The fire retreated and stood down like an animal that understands a bigger animal has arrived. The figures stepped back and did not look at one another, because sometimes looking is a luxury. The capillary slackened. Now, Cell said, and the choir, trained for this their entire lives, took the opening and ran. The braids tore free with a whip's report. The needles collapsed into sterility, and the wardens flooded the access with the white blankness the Alari reserved for things that must never be found in them again. The bridge snapped back into being the bridge. The howlith showed the Leviathan as a cold, long, ugly wedge stippled with scars. No one spoke for as long as it takes 3 long breaths to become 4. Status, Rhys said finally. Ward's holding, Cell said, and if her voice trembled, it did so in a register to high, for anyone to call her on it. Residual imprints standing off at the perimeter. We'll have dreams. Thryn's hands shook as he smoothed his robe, an old comfort from a time when robes were a daily thing, and not just a nod to tradition. It tagged us, he said. It knows our vector through the lattice. If we re-enter, it will find us faster. So we do not re-enter, Rhys said. They wanted to add today, but did not. Saying today invites a tomorrow. The mind's aegis dimmed the lighting by a fraction. The dwarf star hummed. The colch prongs leaned, listening. On the TAC board, a thin green line crawled up the Leviathan's spine, a whisper of current waking in a cold artery. Then another, not a flood, a test. Cell saw it and did not blink. Archseer, she said. It's drawing power. From where? Rhys asked, though they knew. The ship has only so many places to hide a heart. Internal, Thryn said. Recirculating. Bleeding capacitors into primaries. It's stretching. Rhys's mouth went dry again. Prepare the null cascade. On my mark. We will wipe the last 20 minutes from the foam. We cannot carry this into a fight. Cell's hand hovered over a control no one touches lightly. The colch will see that detonation from systems over. I am aware, Rhys said. Better a public blank than a private infection. They looked one last time at the long, brutal wedge hanging in the lane between borders, at the ghost of its name on the hull, at the tiny path of light climbing its spine like the first inch of dawn up a wall. Mark, Rhys said. They never gave it. The Leviathan moved. Not much, not yet. Just a shiver along the plates, a flex in the field. The smallest growl of systems remembering themselves, and in the Illyri's minds. In the place where protocol ends and honesty begins. Something answered that movement with an echoing, guilty thrill, the animal joy of seeing a thing wake that should not. The presence found that joy and smiled without lips. You touched the book, it said. Now you know it has teeth. The mind's aegis stood on a knife's edge between blanking and bracing, between running and watching. Outside, the colch took a step they had been waiting to take for hours. Inside, Cell's finger trembled over erasure. The Leviathan tasted the shape of the Illari fear the way a tongue tastes a cut tooth. For a long instant after the Leviathan stirred, the void itself seemed to lean closer. The dwarf star burned steadily, unaware that one of its children had just shifted in its sleep. But aboard the mind's aegis, every officer felt the change. As if gravity itself had tipped, the Leviathan's hull flexed. Plates groaned, metal fibers stretched, seams whispered, ancient capacitors bled a little more charge into power conduits, and the conduits carried it forward like veins that had not pulsed in years. The ship's core wasn't so much coming alive as it was remembering how to be alive. Cell's voice was calm by habit, but its undertone quivered. Archseer, the vessel is initiating internal circulation. Energy transfer across 3 decks. Vector is consistent with. She hesitated, then finished. A startup cycle. Impossible. One junior whispered. No ship can sleep this long. Rhys gave a slow, hard glance. No ship that should exist, they corrected. Report. Thryn's eyes were closed, not in prayer, but in the tight focus of deep scan. He spoke softly, as though afraid to wake something. Engines not primed, but they are remembering ignition. Weapons dormant, but their housings hum with residual potential. More than that, the mnemonic lattice is reconfiguring. It is aligning, drawing threads together, like soldiers mustering in ranks. The words made the choir shift uneasily. A predatory silenceth colch prongs on the far side of the border glimmered, their passive sensor spikes leaning toward the disturbance. The scavenger fleet had been waiting for an excuse to move. Now they had won. Their hunger rippled across the void in disciplined stillness. We must shudder and withdraw, Cell urged. Every second increases our entanglement. The colch will not sit idle. No, Rhys said. Their voice held iron. If this ship wakes fully, it will not care whose flag flies where. It will act. Better we learn how far it will go now. Then later, when it chooses the time. They felt the weight of the decision even as they made it. It was the kind of call that lived forever in archives. A single line that future generations would argue over with the luxury of hindsight. Seal. All empathic pathways, Riss ordered. Engage only by sense data. No direct thought contact. Cell's wardens complied instantly, layering null fields that cut the Choyer's senses down to bare perception. The bridge dimmed, voices flattening as the great communal resonance of the Alari receded. They were reduced to individuals in a room of stone and glass. It felt like amputating half their limbs, but it kept them safe. For the moment, the first movements the Leviathan's engines flared, not with elegance, not with the smooth bloom of ion or slip drive. They belched raw, brutal fusion flame. The void filled with a roar that was vibration more than sound, a wave that rolled through the mine's Aegis's hull, engines active, Thryn confirmed, though the evidence needed no voice. Primary fusion chamber online, no finesse, all thrust. The ancient ship did not leap forward. Instead, it stretched, turning its bow with slow inevitability until the armored snout pointed directly at the Alari. Fleet, the choir had no resonance, left to share fear, but fear blossomed anyway, individual and sharp. Riss kept their breathing steady, hold position, defensive screens at full. Cell's hands moved in blurs, conjuring fields and shields, but her eyes flicked always to the growing glow of the Leviathan. Archseer, it sees us. This is no random drift. It has us marked. Of course it does. Riss murmured. It tasted us. It counted us. Weapons of memory one by one. Weapons woke. Not with the clean discipline of the collective whose guns hummed in mathematical unison, but with a rawness like bones cracking back into place. Rail cannons along the Leviathan's flanks groaned and flexed. Launch bays yawned open like old wounds. Warheads whispered in the dark, each one carrying the last breath of those who had armed it. The choir could almost hear them singing not literal sound, but a resonance that slipped through even sealed empathic channels. Thryn paled. They are infused. Each weapon resonates with human memory, not just schematics, not just programming. Will. The hololith flickered to show telemetry, hundreds of tiny signatures radiating from the ship, like sparks from a forge each. One bore emotional outrage, grief, defiance woven into hardware. Cell clenched her teeth. They made a weapon out of ghosts. No, Thryn whispered. They made a graveyard that refuses to be still. The counterattack begins. The Leviathan fired not its cannons, not its missiles. It fired its memories. The Alari bridge went black, not literally, but inside each officer's mind the darkness closed, then bloomed with fire. They saw corridors, buckling under bombardment, men and women bracing doors with their bodies while alarms screamed. They felt lungs collapse in vacuum, tasted iron in mouths not theirs, heard final orders shouted into static. It was not an attack in the traditional sense. It was a gift of suffering, forced into the Alari like molten metal into a mold. The junior officers broke first. One screamed and clawed at her eyes. Another vomited until wardens stunned her unconscious. Even Cell, Iron Cell, wavered under the flood, her shield matrices trembling. Riss endured, not through strength, but through discipline. They clung to one truth. This is not my death. This is theirs. That distinction was the only barrier between sanity and collapse. But it wasn't just pain. The memories carried a second payload: conviction. Each image came paired with a resolve. Hold the line. Fight harder. Never surrender. The Leviathan was not simply punishing the Alari. It was trying to teach them. Thryn gasped, his eyes wide with horror and awe. Archseer is training us. The collective breaks in the far side of the border. The Colch finally moved, sensing opportunity. Their needle ships slid forward, sensor spines flaring. They wanted salvage. They wanted prey. But the Leviathan turned, slow and inexorable, and its attention fell upon them like a mountain's shadow. It fired a single kinetic slug. Just one. No guidance. No finesse, just a rod of tungsten hurled with such force that the Colch destroyer in its path ceased to exist. Not wreckage, not fragments, just a spray of molten dust across the stars. The Colch froze. Their hunger folded into calculation. They began to retreat without admitting retreat. Their prongs dimming. Cell whispered, one shot, one ship, and they run. Riss felt the truth settle in their bones, because they know what we now know. This is not a battleship. It is a warning. The hunger-grossed Leviathan did not pursue the Colch. It turned back toward the mine's Aegis and its fleet, weapons humming with spectral fury. In the silence that followed, the presence inside the ship spoke not into the empathic net, not into data streams, but directly into each Alari mind. A voice cold as void, burning as fusion. You wished to see us. Now you will remember us. The Choyer's null fields shuddered, their sterilization layers already fraying. The ship's lesson was not finished, and in Riss's chest, despite all their training, despite all their discipline, something answered the voice, a tiny ember. Not of fear, but of respect. The Leviathan tasted it instantly. And it hungered. The Leviathan hung before them, a scarred monolith of iron and rage, its silhouette haloed by the dwarf star. It had fired only once, and the Colch had fled like rats from a drowning hold. Now its gaze, if a machine could be said to gaze, remained fixed on the Alari fleet. The mine's aegis was silent, stripped bare of its usual Choyer's resonance. The null fields held, brittle as spun glass, while Cell's wardens poured every reserve into keeping the mnemonic flood at bay. On every console, residual phantoms rippled data packets corrupted with screams, fire alarms that would not mute, logs that rewrote themselves with bloodstains across the text. And still the Leviathan waited. A fractured fleet reports began to bleed in from the other Alari. Ships in the formation. The cruiser song of renewal had gone quiet. Its crew locked in catatonia after exposure to the memories. The vigilant seed attempted to fire on the human relic, but succeeded only in discharging its weapons into empty space, the gunnery crew weeping and laughing as they repeated lines in human tongues they could not have known. Even the mine's aegis, pride of the collective, was not whole. Riss could feel it in the ship's neural foma, sour note thrumming through the structure. Like a wound in a symphony, the vessel's memory of itself had been poisoned. Thryn spoke first, his voice thin, exhausted. It is not trying to kill us. If it wished, it would have already. This is indoctrination. Cell spat the word like venom. No, this is infection, and we must cut it out. Can you? Riss asked, their tone level, but their eyes fixed on her. Cell hesitated an answer enough. The mark of the Leviathan's presence reached out again. This time, it did not drag the Alari into full illusions. It only whispered. But the whisper carried. Wait, you will dream of us. You will sing our songs. You will know what it means to stand until you burn. The words did not vibrate in the air. They etched themselves directly into the officer's bones, into the way thought shaped itself. Riss felt them lodge in their mind like glass splinters. Even if they lived 1,000 years, those splinters would never work their way free. Junior officers began to murmur in unison, unbidden. Hold the line. Hold the line. Hold the line. Cell slammed her hand against a console hard enough to bruise. Archseer, order the retreat. Now, Riss closed their eyes. Retreat was survival. But survival carried its own curse. The Leviathan would not chase them. It didn't have to. They would carry it home with them. Flyth command came low but steady. All ships, break contact. Pull back into collective space. Do not engage further. Engines roared. The Alari fleet wheeled about, their graceful slip drives igniting. Light smeared across the void as they accelerated. Behind them, the Leviathan remained where it was, its engines glowing faintly, its cannons humming like the throats of 1,000 mourners. It did not pursue. It only watched, and the Alari could feel that gaze even as the stars blurred with their escape. Aftermaths later, when the fleet limped back across the collective's borders, the infection revealed itself fully. Admirals woke screaming, their minds replaying the deaths of human sailors. Engineers began designing weapons that violated every Alari ethic, muttering about redundancy and sacrifice. Choirs no longer sang in harmony. Their resonance had been fractured, each note touched by foreign echoes. Riss themselves, in the privacy of their chamber, found their hand trembling over a datapad as they wrote words in a language they had never studied. Harsh human consonants, blunt syllables. We do not break. We bend. We hold. When they realized what they had written, they smashed the pad against the wall. But the words remained, burning in memory. A contagion of war. The collective began to fracture under the weight of the curse. Some factions demanded the Leviathan be destroyed, purged with a fleet of purifiers, even if it meant violating treaties and inviting war. Others argued it must be studied, for no civilization could afford to ignore such a weapon of will. And some, quietly, suggested the unthinkable, that perhaps the humans had discovered a truth the collective had forgotten, and that truth should be embraced. All the while, in dreams, the Alari saw corridors of gray steel and heard the voice of Captain Aosu. "We hold the line, the curse sealed in the great archives of the collective." The entry was made with deliberate vagueness. Designation: HSV Leviathan classification. Cultural contagion. Weaponized memory directive: avoid contact. Do not scan. Do not engage. But no directive could erase what had already been sown. The curse was not in the ship. The curse was in them. Epilogue at the Tacit line. The Leviathan drifted once more, silent, scarred, eternal. It did not pursue the Alari. It did not move to strike at the Colch. It only lingered. A tomb that was also a teacher, a weapon that was also a scripture. It had done its work. It had passed on its lesson. Somewhere, in the quiet black between stars, a thought whispered through the collective's fractured minds. Some weapons are not meant to be studied. Some memories are not meant to be shared. And some battles never end. The Leviathan waited. In it, hungered still,